Welcome to the Speckled Truth podcast. This is the only show dedicated to the conservation of the trophy trout population from the East Coast to the Gulf Coast. Here, we go below the surface to discuss what happens when science and anglers work together for a cause. Gear up with your host, Captain Chris Bush, a trophy trout purist, leader and educator within the fishing community, as he talks about all things big speckled trout. Get ready for the slimy, salty truth, better known as the Speckled Truth.
Hey everyone, I'm Captain Chris, and I'd like to welcome you to the very first Speckled Truth podcast. Truth be told, this has been a long time in the making, but through the support of our families, friends, and you, the followers, it's finally a reality. No doubt, over the course of this podcasting endeavor, things and formats will change, but we'll keep the focus and intent on trophy trout and conservation with all of our guests and topics. That being said, I'd like to welcome my first guest, my dad, Captain Charlie Bush. Pops, what's going on, buddy?
Hey, buddy. How you doing tonight?
I'm good, man. I'm good. How's everything in Louisiana, in my hometown of New Orleans?
It's pretty hot right now. We almost set a record today. We had a balmy 98 degrees. The best part is the weather's going to be good for the weekend for fishing.
Are you going to go?
No. Maybe Sunday. I say no, maybe Sunday. You know me, I can't resist.
Yeah, no. Saturdays are an out, but Sundays, I know you do like to go on Sundays. But
I do every now and then. Saturday's
I got you.
out. Yeah.
Well, hey, so, first off, bud, thanks for being the very first guest. And if we were going to do this endeavor, I didn't want to have anybody else start this other than you, right? Because you've been so integral as part of me in my fishing endeavor and kind of growing as an angler. And so anything we do, we obviously have always done together. And so this is a new venture for us and a new adventure for Speckled Truth. And so what better way to kick it off than having old Pops on the podcast. So thanks for bearing with us, man. But before I get too far in terms of our conversation, because I know who you are, you're my dad, right? At least you have been for the last 38 years that I've been alive. And so, but a lot of our followers and a lot of folks that are maybe new to the podcast may not necessarily know who you are. So if you can, just take a second and tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Chris. First, let me tell you, I'm really honored to be on the show. I admire you. You're my idol now.
That's crazy, man.
It's true. I'm very proud of my children. I've actually been married for 53 years. I married my grammar school sweetheart, your mom.
Yep.
We went to grammar school together. We were married 53 years. We celebrated that anniversary last week.
That's right, last week.
Yep. And I'm 73 years of age. We have 3 children. Michelle, the oldest, Kerry, your older brother, and you, the baby, of course.
Yeah, about 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years. You were surprised. A pleasant surprise, I might add. But
that's awesome.
I'm actually a retired automotive mechanic. That's what I did to make a living, support our family. I fixed cars for a living for a long time, and I really enjoyed it. I was always blessed to be able to work with my hands, so that was a blessing. When I asked your mom to marry me 53 years ago, I asked her one thing. I said, honey, you got to take me for what I am, but I said, I've got three ideals in my life, and my family motto, I want it to be these 3 things if you want to marry me. I said we have to keep God first, family second, and fishing third in our lives, and you got to stay in that order.
It's funny you mention that because for those again that are kind of new maybe to us, obviously to me and you and our dynamic, excuse me. When I was growing up, that's what you always preach. So, you're not just saying that as a result of this podcast.
Nope.
That's something that you truly had in terms of our core values of our family, right? Of God, family, and fishing. And it's funny because as a 38-year-old man, married now 11 years with 3 kids, 3 boys, we still live by that same motto. And it's funny because, now looking back, and kind of reflecting a little bit more, I didn't quite realize maybe how much fishing was a part of our life. And it really is it's a fixture of our family. it's almost to the point where it's an actual sibling to some extent. Mom could probably attest, as well as carrying me. But no, I mean, it's not lip service. That is definitely the core values that you've set forth. And I appreciate it. One, because I like to fish. And obviously that started with you. But that's something that's transcended not only to your immediate family, my brother and my sister, but to our family, and to your grandkids and to your kids. So yeah, thanks for that, buddy. And yeah, thank you for that. And growing me up, or at least raising me in that household, right? Both you and mom. That's a huge part of who I am as a person. Part of kind of the work ethic that we have, and in terms of problem solving. It's funny how much fishing will teach you in terms of the intangibles, but um, it's funny. It's just those core values and how they've been such a figment in our lives. So hey, as we transition a little bit, so obviously you're on this podcast because you enjoy fishing. So who introduced you to the sport of fishing, and about how old were you?
Well, actually, your grandfather, my dad, never had a boat. And I just love to watch people fish all the time. And dad knew that. And so when he loved to fish, and he had friends that had a boat. So he would ask them, he said, "Look, do you mind if my son would tag along?"
About how old were you then?
Oh, I was about 7 or 8 years old. I remember the first trip he took me on. We went. It was freezing cold. I remember shivering to death. They shoved me underneath the bow of the boat. We rode somewhere I couldn't tell you. I was 7 or 8 years old, but anyway, we wound up fishing for sheephead and
That's funny.
against some pilings someplace. But
Yeah.
you know what? I was hooked. Just that moment on, I was hooked. It was the thought, the thrill of being out in the open water. It allured me, and I couldn't get enough of it.
The irony there is that it started with sheephead, right? And
What a sheephead. Yeah, it's all fish, a sheephead with a piece of shrimp and a hook, a bare hook, just floating it down against some pilings, catching sheephead. But it was fun. It was fun.
and so I know this, but I mean, wherever that was that in Cocodrie? Now looking back, do you know?
No, it was someplace out of Delacroix, from what I remember.
Uh-huh.
And it was a dead end canal, and it had some pilings. We went from dead end canal to dead end canal, looking
Yeah.
for pilings, obviously, you know.
Yeah.
But that's how we fish them. And I remember it was freezing cold, and I was shivering to death, and I wouldn't say a word because I didn't want them to think I was a sissy, you know.
Yeah. So, yeah, I got you.
But they knew I was cold. They shoved me underneath the bow of the boat to keep me warm when the boat was moving. So that was nice.
That's funny. They call like Child Protective Services now for doing
Yeah,
that.
right.
Right. That's funny. But so having caught sheepshead in an undisclosed location in South Louisiana, do you remember catching your actual first trout?
I really do. And it's ironical you say that. I was reflecting on that today, and my uncle invited my dad's brother invited us on his boat, and he used to fish out of Ostrika. We used to drive down to Buras 90 miles an hour, get down to Buras, launch in the river, go through the locks, Ostrika locks, and then fish the rigs out in Breton Sound. Well, they love to fish. Now we talking, 50 years ago. We talking longer than 50 years ago, 60 years ago. We talking they would love to catch a box of white trout and bull croakers, and they would bottom fish. I hated it,
Right.
but
What were y'all fishing with?
well, they would fish with double rigs with shrimp and hook and a big old weight, six on the bottom, just like Carolina rigging it on the bottom, and catching two white trout at a time and two bull croakers at a time, and it was all about the meat. Well, they were on the back of the boat and they're fishing on the bottom. Well, on the way out there, I happened to see some guys surf fishing at Hog Island. Now, you never knew I don't think you ever knew where Hog Island was, but it wasn't far from Stone Island where we fished at. You and I fished at
Delacroix. Yep.
Yeah, it was a big shell reef. When you come through the Ostrika locks, you couldn't miss it. You had to go around. It was a big shell reef. They had some guys there surf fishing. And man, I saw those guys surf fishing. I said, boy, I want to do this. I want to get out of this boat and get in that water with those guys more than anything. So I suggested to my dad and my uncle, and they laughed at me. Oh, no, we're going. So I get out to the rigs. And so the second time I went with them, I had my spinning rod and I put a sidewinder on, which was just a chrome. It was a chrome bait, with a flash in it with a bucktail. And I caught my first speckled trout at the rig. Well, their eyes got big as saucers when I caught that speckled trout.
Did you ever go wade fish Hog Island?
No, never did. They would never go there. They would never take me. And at the time I was too young. I mean,
Yeah.
So
yeah, you were along for the ride.
I
right
was
at that
8,
point.
9 years old, along for the ride. But that was
awesome.
The first time I caught my trout, and I was hooked because it was different. I didn't want the nuance of just bottom fishing. It was boring to me. There was no trickery involved. You know what I'm saying?
So what was what was it about that trout, or what was it about? Yeah, what were some like the characteristics? Do you remember that? Like any characteristics, like the notorious head shake or something along those lines from that particular trout, or that trip?
Yeah, we were fishing about 10 feet of water, and I probably caught him probably close to the bottom, maybe 3-4 feet off the bottom. And the head shake that I felt on that trout, it was so different because it wasn't just like reeling up a log. You know what I'm saying? And so when he got to the top of the water and he saw that head shake, I was so excited. As a young kid, I was just so excited. And I got him in a boat, and to see the reaction on their face was priceless. That is indebted in my mind forever. Going back looking at that.
So did Papa, after you caught that trout or after y'all went, is that something y'all started to target a little bit more, or was that something? No, he was just pure meat.
Papa never did fish trout until he bought a camp. He retired, and I don't remember the year, but he retired and he bought a camp in Cocodrie. And so it was right about a year after Mom and I got married, I think, or maybe a couple of years after Mom and I got married. He bought a camp in Cocodrie and retired. And so he used to take your grandmother, him and her used to go for the week, and they'd go down there and they'd fish Monday through Friday and come back on the weekends. And he started trout fishing. That's when he started trout fishing. So we fixed his structures out of Bay St. Elaine and all those little reefs out there. And he was, he got accustomed to trout fishing. But Papa had one way of fishing, one way only. It was a caulk and a shad rig, and that was it. That's all he knew. That's all he wanted to know. It put fish in a box, and he was happy with that, So.
Yeah. So, I mean, but, thinking back to, my young life in terms of fishing the Mississippi Delta, and for everybody listening, I classify our home waters or my home waters really as Port Sulphur, Louisiana. And so,
right.
But we fished everywhere, Pops, right? We fished everything from Shelby, actually really Pontchartrain, all the way to Cocodrie or Fouchon and Timbalier and those areas, right? So, I mean, the Delta was our oyster.
Yeah. Well, you got to remember now, you were the baby. You were 10 years. It was 10 years between your older brother. And, after Mom and I got married, we fished. I fished. I had a little 12, 14-foot flatboat. I put it in the back of my pickup truck with my pirogue, and I would go down to Buras, and I'd put it in Boothville and put it in over the levee, put it in by myself. I had a little motor that I carried, a little 5.5, hooked it on the back, and I'd go out and I'd cast and blast out of Boothville. Well, I had Bayou Carencro right there. Well, it was all open land, so I would go out Bayou Carencro and duck hunt in those ponds, and then after I shot my ducks, my limits, I would fish in those ponds. I'd catch bass and I'd catch redfish. Yeah. So it was a perfect venue for me by myself. I was a loner. I always was a loner. But I'd go down there and I'd enjoy. That's how I grew up after we were married. So I did that, and I brought your brother, your older brother. He was into it. So he and I, would go all the time. Well, what happened was, he obviously went away to college, and I kind of lost interest because I didn't have my fishing buddy with me anymore. So at that time, I told Mom, I said, look, I'm selling a boat, the little boat that we have. And I said, we did something entirely different. We had gotten a piece of property in Mississippi, a little farm in Mississippi with a little pond on it. Well, lo and behold, you came along. Well, God blessed us with a son that just loved to live in that freaking pond. I mean, you couldn't get enough of that pond. The minute we got to Mississippi, you dove in the pond. One
Literally.
day on the way home, your mom said, Charlie, you got to go buy another boat. That boy loves to fish too much. You got to go buy a boat. And she insisted on me going to buy another boat. So the next day I started looking in the paper and I found the Get the Net.
Get the net,
The
baby.
Get the Net.
To get
Remember
the
to
net.
Get the Net?
Oh, I remember to get the net, man. That was the boat, right? I mean, I was probably in fifth grade, fourth
That's
or fifth
right.
grade.
Fourth, fifth grade. That's right.
When we got
That's
get
right.
the net, and it was a 16-foot weld
That's
craft,
correct.
right? With a
That's
35,
correct.
a 35,
Had a 35,
yeah.
brand new 35 on it. But the first trip you and I went, we went all the way to Breton Sound in and out of Delacroix, and we almost ran out of gas. We got out to Black Bay, and I said, Chris, we're almost out of gas. We got to go back.
Well, hey, I will say this though. So we fished around Mozambique Point, right out of Terrabuffs, right? We ended up catching quite a
We
few
did.
trout, and I remember I didn't really maybe understand the gravity of the situation, but we were probably halfway back, and I think we had a 6-gallon tank, and you kept lifting the gas. Kept lifting the gas tank to make sure we had enough gas. And I remember you just kind of staying quiet. Maybe just didn't understand how close we were to running out of gas. But I remember that trip, man, very vividly.
You know what I remember about the trip most is the fact that I bought 100 live shrimp. And you know what? We threw 99 overboard because the fish we caught on plastic. You remember that?
That wasn't that trip. I will say that. I know you're 73 years old now, and the memory may be getting to fade, but now I'll say, I will say though, that wasn't that trip. That trip, I actually wrote about it. Dude, it's funny because those types of trips infuse you or just make this indelible mark on your life. And that was one of those trips. That's when we finally actually had the 75. Remember, you went from the 35, we upgraded to a 75 Yamaha 2-stroke. And man, that's when you put the decking on a boat and everything. I mean, that thing was pimped out. And so that's when we actually headed out to, and we fished around Snake Island. And this is in the Delacroix Basin in Louisiana, for those not familiar with that area.
Stone
but
Island.
this is so we go to Stone Island, we go to Snake Island, we bought 100 live shrimp from Serenades, and we finally pulled up. It was a calm enough day. We ran all the way to Iron Banks, man. And that was unheard of to run from that far to Iron Banks in a 16-foot little flatboat. And I remember we pulled up, and so we started fishing. And we were throwing cork and shrimp, and all of a sudden we caught it, started catching hardheads. And I had the Abu Garcia 5600 CI on an Abu Black Max. That was the first bait caster I ever owned. And I put on an H&H Cockahoe, generic jig head, and cast it out there, caught a trout. And I think you followed suit, and we ended up catching 50 trout. And that was the day. That was the day we came back with 70 live shrimp. And and I still tell this story actually in the CCA banquets I've been able to speak at. I still tell that story because it left such an impression on. I think that's a day we actually went artificial only for the rest of our angling careers. That was the day
that changed my life forever. That was. It was.
Yeah. What? So not to belabor the point, but I mean, what were other trips that you felt? I mean, we've had a lot of memorable trips. What was one that really stood out to you?
Honestly, the one that I think about, probably there's actually two trips that stand out in my mind above all others. The first one was with your older brother, Kerry. Mm-hmm. I fished the west side, the Barataria Basin a lot. And so I used to fish out of Empire. And we went to this place called English Bayou. And it was a big oyster reef. And your brother and I sat on this oyster reef and caught over 60 reds in a couple hours. We had reds everywhere. And as we would catch them, we would throw them back. And I remember we came home and Mom said, well, where's the fish? And your brother said, well, Mom, we threw them all back. And I remember that like it was yesterday because we had such a great time. It was a memory that stands out in my mind. We caught a lot of fish, but we didn't need to bring any home. It was just so much fun being
Yeah.
together and enjoying the great outdoors together and the time we spent. That was the first one. And the second one that stands out in my mind is fairly recent, actually. I've had so many great trips of great catches with great folks and a lot of people that I've taken with. But the one that stands out in my mind, I think second, was the one that you and I made this past year. I caught the fish of my lifetime. To me, was the biggest fish I ever caught. I caught a 27-inch fish. But that wasn't a story. It was a story that you and I spent that time on a foggy morning together, wade fishing on a flat that shared a lot of memories, a lot of old stories, and the relationship that we had on the water meant so much to me. The fish was
Mhm.
coup de grace, but
Yep.
I still have nightmares about the one I lost. I tell you that all the time.
Yeah.
I said that fish that got
Hey, man.
away was bigger than that 27 that I landed.
Yeah. Well, live long enough, brother, and come down
Well,
with me this winter, and
God willing, I'll be there. You
let's
know
get
that.
revenge on her, dude. So I tell that story as well, just because I mean, I've told it on Salt Strong's podcast, and I shared that actually in my CCA talks as well, just because I think that was the time for me that I saw I maybe truly felt it and understood that the tide change a little. You'll always be my dad. You'll always be my fishing mentor. You'll always kind of be that in my life. But I felt like that was the day you kind of passed the torch where I was the one who was, for lack of better terms, teaching
That's
you how to
correct.
fish, or taking care of you like you've done for me, obviously, throughout the course of my life and angling career, And so I felt like that was a very special moment for me. But one that actually sticks out, uh, thinking as you're talking about it, fishing the west side of the river was actually Myrtle Grove. We fished Myrtle Grove a lot. Remember that?
Absolutely. I'd wait for you to get off the school bus and have the boat loaded and ready to go. And you get off the school bus, we'd
Yep.
hop in a truck and go to Myrtle Grove and fish the afternoon. We did it on many occasions.
Where would we fish? Let's
Oh,
see
we
if you
fished
remember
Bay
this.
Round, Bay 5, Bay
There you
L'Oreal.
go,
Huh?
baby. Bay Round, that north side of Bay Round in a fall time frame. It was something about like the aroma. It was something about like the air. Everything stands out to me in that particular instance. And fishing those north side of Bay Round grass flats when they actually had it was really lush with grass. I think it still is now that Carnarvon's open, but throwing those H&H sparking beetles,
Oh,
man. Remember
absolutely.
that?
It did it in my mind forever.
And those trips, and even the one that really truly stands out was when we woke up one morning on Athenia. We had the boat kind of loaded, and it was a game time decision. We saw the front; it was like right in Alexandria, and you were like, "We got
Yeah.
like 2 hours." I was like, "All right, let's go." And so, yeah, we went down there, and sure enough, man, we caught 50 trout real quick. And as we're going back up Wilkinson Canal, you could see the line. I mean, you could see it go from cloudy to just wind blowing out the north real hard, getting cold, and we timed it just right, man. And we had so many of those days,
Yep.
Pop. So those are the ones that really stand out to me. But anyway, you kind of alluded to it a little bit, like going with Kerry and throwing those redfish back. So recently, tell people about your endeavors with Tag Louisiana and kind of what you've been doing there.
Well, honestly, Chris, I retired. I worked so many years fixing cars, and then I went and worked down at a church down in the French Quarter for quite some time, doing construction work, and recently retired as at a custodian at the school across the river. Things I loved. I love working with children, and
Mm-hmm.
so I love being able to teach children. And so after I retired, I made my bucket list. There was a couple things on my
Uh-huh.
bucket list that I wanted to do. And I told your mom, I said, these are some of the things that I really wanted to do. We've never done. First thing we did, Mom and I took 2 weeks, no frills, and just went and traveled and saw the good old United States, spent some time together, reminisced, and reestablished ourselves as husband and wife. That was very important in our life. And then, you know, during that time, you had gone and got your captain's license. I remember that. So I was kind of envious. I'll be quite honest. I said, that kid, I'm so proud of him. He went and got his captain's license. And so Mom said, well, why don't you go get yours? I said, I ain't been to school in 40 something years. How am I pass that test? So you encouraged me to do it, and I did. I went and got my captain's license, and then I started this website called Tagging Memories. I'll never forget it, because I wanted to teach children how to fish. Well, unfortunately, with all the pedophilia that's going on and things, it just didn't work out the way I really wanted to plan, because, you have to get children one-on-one to teach them. So as an alternative plan, I saw that Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries had aquatic instructor program. So I went and took the course and became an aquatic instructor. Well, that allowed me to go to different schools to teach children what I had learned in my 50 years of fishing, or 60 years of fishing. So I was able to pass that on.
Right. So
in the meantime, Tag Louisiana came along and was prominent, and somebody had mentioned it to me. He said, why don't you start tagging fish? And if you remember correctly, you and I were fishing in Bay Cray. I think it was Bay Cray, and we had caught a tag redfish. Now this was remember that? Years and years and years ago. I said, I think this is something I'd like to do, because you just can't keep all the fish you catch. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I said, well, I'm going to join the Tag Louisiana program. So I did. I got to meet some wonderful folks on the water. Other people were tagging. And the first year they had their banquet, we had a small crowd of people, small crowd of folks. Maybe 25, 30 people were invited to the banquet by Louisiana Wildlife and Fisheries. And I had tagged about 50 or 60 fish. And so they recognized that you've tagged 50 or 60 fish, which is pretty good. So I said, well, next year I'm going to catch more than that. So every year I had to up the ante. You had to catch a few more, because it was fun. It became fun. And on the water, I met other guys that were tagging. Like they had a guy that I still see to this day, Dr. Tedesco. He really is an idol for me. The guy fishes out of Grand Isle. He fishes with a fly rod. And he's tagged well over 10,000 fish. Most of them caught on a fly rod, which I just truly admire. The guy is a phenomenal fisherman. It is.
That's crazy.
But he is a phenomenal fisherman. So every year, the ante was up. So the 4 or 5 years that I participated in Tag Louisiana was just a wonderful time. And it was a challenge for me to increase every year to tag a few more fish. And then not only that, I felt as though, hey, this information is so valuable, because we're gaining information about something, a fish, a species that I truly love. There's something about those trout you just can't get enough of. So the more I caught, the more I wanted to catch, and the more I wanted to tag. And I had the perfect boat for it at the time. I had that little yellowfin. We had a huge live well, and I could put 25, 30 trout in there and keep them live and then tag them all up at one time. So it was perfect.
You went from tagging, so don't undersell it here. I mean, because it's quite the accomplishment. And actually, that's really a question I'll have in a second is that your proudest accomplishment? But to put it in perspective, you went from tagging like 50 or 60 fish to then tagging like 1,200 trout to then tagging like 2,000 trout, and then ultimately like 3,500 trout in a year. These are all yearly value. So if I did the math right per your trip count, it actually worked out to like you were averaging, Dad, this is ridiculous, but you were averaging 43 trout per trip. That's by yourself.
That's about right.
That's unheard of, man. That's insane. But so as a result of that, you won the tag, or the top tagger in the state. What years were that?
You would have to ask me that.
I
think it was 15, 16, and 17, maybe.
Okay. So yeah, basically 3 straight years in terms of the top tagger in the state. And so, is that your proudest
No,
accomplishment as an angler? What is?
honestly, honestly, my my proudest accomplishment is being able to teach young people to to teach young people the sport that I love so much. I have to say that
Hmm.
that's my proudest accomplishment of being with the young people and watching the glow on their face when they catch their first fish and when they release that fish.
Yeah.
To me, I'm passed on something that I instilled in you, and I passed it on to other young people. To me,
Hmm.
that's something I'm kind of proud of. It touches my heart.
Yeah.
It really does, because I'm sorry.
No, you okay, buddy?
I treasure our resource. I think we're so blessed. We're blessed more in Louisiana than we realize, that we have such a valuable resource, and we take it for granted. I think all too often that we don't stop and smell the roses, you know. And
Hmm.
if we don't teach our young people, our children, spend time with them, then where are we headed? Where are we headed?
And teach them the values of a resource, right? I mean, just like you, and it's forged me as a person being on the Delta, right? And growing up in that environment, getting lost. I mean, shoot, I had my own boat before I had my own driver's license, and I mean, I know not every childhood
Yeah, it's
situation is
true.
that way, but I consider myself obviously extremely blessed and lucky. But what better way and what better place to grow up than just getting lost in a natural wild resource and taking it all in? That's why forever till, I mean, I've fished a myriad of different estuaries. It still goes back to the just a pure love for the Louisiana Delta, because it's been so paramount to me as a person, and that's, I see what you're talking about. If you teach people that, if you get them instilled in that and get them to understand that at an early age, man, you have forged that person as a member of society, right? As a person. And we take that for granted, like you're saying, especially in Louisiana, because instead of this mentality, this blinder mentality of just going to catch a limit of trout, and that's the only reason we launch a boat, we have completely missed the mark. So, thank you for sharing that, man. Thank you.
Yeah, I think a lot of it boils down to respect too. If we don't respect what God has entrusted to us, our resource and what we have, then that also transpires into
Mhm.
life,
Yeah.
you know, and it forms us as people,
Yeah.
as a society.
Yeah. I got you, man. Well, thanks for sharing that, Pops. Hey everyone, I'd like to take a small break to sincerely thank our podcast sponsors. As you know, we're a brand about sharing the passion and pursuit of trophy speckled trout, as well as our conservation. Fortunately for us, Mirror, Texas Custom Lures, and the original Custom Corky support that same passion, which is evident through the support of this podcast. Simply put, without these brands, none of this would be possible. And we're incredibly appreciative, and we hope you are too. Now, let's get back to the discussion. Obviously we have a lot going on in Louisiana right now with regards to the speckled trout stock assessment. What's your take on that?
Well, let me say this: I worked with as a volunteer with Wildlife and Fisheries for several years now, and I will say this: those people are the most dedicated employees I have ever worked with in my entire life. These folks have master's degrees in what they do. They're knowledgeable. They're dedicated. They spend a lot of time on the water. they spend more time than they actually get paid for, and they get paid peanuts. But I'm going to tell you, they do what they do because they love it. Whatever they come out with as far as stock assessment goes, I could live
Believe
with.
it, right?
My, pers- my personal take is I have to use common sense. If I look at where we've been and where we're going with the land loss that we've lost, it only leads to the fact that we're going to have to make some changes. You know, life's different than it was 40, 50, 60 years ago, like we were talking about a few minutes ago. It's changed. And so if we want to keep what we have, we want to improve what we have for our future generations, then we've got to make some changes. Use common sense. The land loss is incredible. And even if we started tomorrow and we started filling in, we could never replace what we've lost. And it's going to have an effect on our resource. Just common sense tells me that.
Yeah. So, do you, simple question, right? I mean, do you think the fishing personally, as an angler, right, as a dude who has no scientific background, et cetera, but you're on the water a lot. I mean, you fish 100 days a year plus. I mean, as a 73-year-old man, that's a lot. But do you feel over the course of your tenure, right, in the Louisiana Delta, has it gotten better or has it gotten worse?
Well, overall, it's on a decline. Now, let me say this: this year I had one of probably the best summers I've ever had fishing, but that's not an indication of the of the whole estuary because there's too many variables. You and I talked about it the other day a little bit about the variables. About the river being high this year. Well, the East, you know, they had a horrible year catching speckled trout in the east side, Delacroix, and that whole area. It was horrible because of the fresh water. Well, those fish are smart, and that's why I like fishing speckled trout because they're smart. They're smart breed. They're going to move. It's time for them to migrate, to spawn, to reproduce. They got to have that salinity, so they're going to move. So I happened to be in an area that had high salinity. Therefore, I had a great production. But overall, I think the stock assessment is going to show that we're down, and I find that we're not catching the big trout like we used to catch. Now, you see these posts all the time on Facebook about these wonderful catches and these dock shots. That's not an indication of the average Joe. You know, it really isn't. And I think if you talk to the average guy that's on the water that goes out the weekend and takes his family, he's going to tell you the same thing that it's not as good as it was
I don't even,
years ago.
here's the deal though, is I don't even necessarily think it's the average Joe that's saying that now, right? I think it's a good portion of the guide fleet. I think it's people like me and you that have grown up fishing there and have had a lot of success in the estuary, but just have seen something a little different, you know. And so, yeah, we're talking about the average Joe that fishes, 3 times a year. We're not talking about that guy. I think where it really kind of rings true is a guy who's fished a lot in his life and has had a ton of success, then kind of saying, hey, things aren't right here, and even some of the guide fleet. And so I just asked you that because, yeah, again, you've fished across the span of decades, right? Decades within the Louisiana estuary. You've seen bays, you've seen shorelines that I have never seen even in my youngest time on the water, right? And so there's definitely something to be said there with regards to the fishery.
The average person, as you said, it's on the water a couple times a year, maybe a dozen times a year. When you're on the water every week, like I am, or a couple times a week, and you see land disappearing from week to week,
Yeah.
you know, that's the impact that I see was here today and gone tomorrow. It happens. It's happening before my very eyes.
Yeah.
So something's got to change. Something's got to give. It can't continue the way we're going. And
Yeah.
fishing is definitely, firstly, is got to suffer.
Yeah.
It's got to be on the decline.
So, I mean, with all the adversity that is going on, I mean, and I mean, you see some efforts going on out there. Are you saddened by the state of the fishery? Or are you inspired by its future?
Well, I think I'm inspired in one respect because we recognize that we have a problem and that we're going to do something about it. And I think the first thing in anything is to realize to look deep in your own soul and say, look, and admit, like an alcoholic, I've got a problem. I got to deal with it. I got to do something about it, you know? And I think we as Louisianans realize that finally we got a problem. Let's do something about it. And so we're trying to make these final steps. So I think we're finally starting to make some headway, to make some positive steps. So I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good to hear. So I have one question, and to kind of bring it to more of a lighter note, to bring it more to a little bit of a lighter note. Um, all the information, right? All the trout that you've tagged in the Tag Louisiana program, which is over 12,000, right? Uh,
Uh-huh.
what recapture or recaptures stand out to you the most?
Um, I had a trout that traveled was recaptured 2 years after I tagged it. That's the longest one I had. It was over 2 years. So we're looking at almost 500 days, close to 2 years, 500 days on the water. It had grown 4 inches, but it had traveled over 100 and some odd
What was
miles.
it recaptured?
You were recaptured 100 and some odd miles away.
Do you remember
It
where?
had actually I had caught it on the west bank and it was recaptured on the east bank.
Damn. So over in the Delacroix estuary?
Yeah,
Kidding.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, and on another note, we caught a redfish. You and I had tagged a redfish in Mississippi, and it had traveled 70 something miles and was caught in the Gulfport Harbor.
No kidding.
And in a matter of 4 months, grew like 5 inches.
Yeah. I remember that. And so redfish don't surprise me, right? But the trout surprised me.
Well,
Oh,
I have several trout that traveled well over 200 miles
no kidding.
that were recaptured. And what's interesting about trout, there's so much data that could have been looked at when the program was going on that never was exploited. And I think I'm disappointed in that because there's so much information in the tag program that could have been used. And I even talked to a lot of biologists about it. I said, yeah, we're only tapping the surface. We could have got into the particulars about the size of the trout that were recaptured. I noticed from my own observations that the trout that I recaptured, had a recapture rate of about 3%, but that 3% was on fairly large trout. And because I say large trout, I'm talking about in Louisiana, 15 to 17 inch trout had about a good 3% recapture rate. The smaller trout was slightly lower on the ones that I had tagged, but the larger trout were more subjective to living a little bit longer, and be recaptured. A lot of trout were caught. A lot of them were recaptured within days of when they were tagged. So I had a lot of recaptures within 3 or 4 days within a 10-mile radius of where they were tagged, which is interesting. But there's so much data that could have been used that wasn't used. And I know I always takes money. I understand that, the bottom line. But I just think it's something that was lost. That especially when we had so many volunteers. We had so many Tag Louisiana volunteers. The last bank we went to, we had over 100 people volunteering their time and money to tag these fish. But anyway,
and that's somewhat of the disheartening part, right? Is that Louisiana, which has such a catch and keep mentality, you infuse this program or you start this program really from nothing, right? And then all of a sudden it grows in momentum. And all of a sudden you get a lot of Louisiana anglers with their Louisiana mindset now wanting to be participants in the program and taking what they need and release the rest, right? We talk about that throughout all of the things we talk about with Speckled Truth is just simply taking what you need and release the rest. But it gave them an alternative to keeping everything. And yet when you debunk the program, it's kind of unfortunate. So so I remember Todd Masson, though, he wrote an article where you caught 2 or 3 trout in the same spot that you actually tagged them.
Exactly. I sure did. 2 weeks after I tagged him, I caught him in the same spot.
So what's your theory there behind that? So like if you were looking at that data set, what would that tell you?
Those trout were growing. They had a lot of forage, a lot of bait fish, a lot of fin fish, the area that I was fishing at the time. A a lot of finger mullet. Those fish didn't move. They weren't going to leave that food source.
Yeah.
They were going to stay right on that food source.
And that's exactly what I get from that, right? Is that, they're creatures or creatures of comfort, right? And so you caught
Yep.
that fish, you release that fish, and he's like, well, I'm not moving. There's a ton of shrimp, fin fish I'm going to eat and grow. And I think, if I remember right, that either both of the fish, I think, grew an inch in a month. So
That's correct.
It's crazy
That's correct.
that a fish that is particularly known as being somewhat of a delicate species and won't survive handling and releasing and all that stuff, actually will. And so, again, we can't talk about it enough about just taking what you need, release the rest. But people that say catch and release doesn't necessarily work, or it's doing more harm than good, I would quasi disagree there, because there is a lot of good that is not only notional, but it's proven to work in a fishery. So anyway, well, thanks for sharing that, bud. So I have, we're going to wrap it up. It's about 50 or so minutes into the podcast. And I got a couple of kind of quick facts. I know we've been kind of on a more heavier note, so I want to lighten it up before we go ahead and cut you loose. That way you can actually go to sleep.
That's past my bedtime.
I got you, brother. But hey, just some quick facts. So, favorite lure.
Favorite lure. If I had to pick one lure,
Yeah, go for
to
it.
catch fish, or my favorite lure
Favorite lure to catch fish.
to catch fish. Well, that would have to be
Catch trout.
well, that's all I fish for. I would actually if I had to pick one lure to go out and put one lure in my tackle box, I would use a 1/4 ounce jig head and a green hornet.
Green hornet matrix shad.
I tagged 150 trout one day on that one bait.
That's crazy.
It is. It is.
Hey, what's the and this isn't one of those questions, but like, what's the most trout you've actually caught in a day by yourself tagging?
210.
200. That's all I can do is laugh at that, right? That's ridiculous.
Absurd. It's obscene.
Oh my God. 210. Crazy. All right.
I bought 4 home for supper.
Did you really? No,
I
because
did.
they were legal, or because the other ones
They
weren't?
died in the live well.
I got you. That was when you were on that string, man. What, you tagged like 3,600 that third or fourth year? Is crazy. But
Right.
all right. So braid or mono?
Oh, rubber band line, of course.
And for those who don't know, my pops, that's monofilament. What do you have a certain preference?
Summertime, I will fish 17, and wintertime, I will step down to 12.
12. Particular brand you like?
Stren.
What? Just regular Stren, big game. What?
Stren, I'm drawing a blank.
Okay,
It's
got it.
there's a certain Stren that I use. Yes.
I got you. Lastly, what rod and reel, or what reel brand do you prefer?
Corrado.
Corrado, Shimano Gap.
Corrado.
It's funny. We've thrown them all, right? We've thrown them all.
I have thrown pretty much all of them.
Yeah, I got you, buddy. Well, hey, man. Pops, brother. Well, first off, I can't wait to see you again, man. Both you and Mom. I love you, dude. And so I cannot say thank you enough for being on a podcast. Obviously, this is the first one. And like I said before, I'm not doing anything, especially in the fishing world, without my pops being first, right? Because you set it in motion. And so, like everything else we do, where it's starting, it's new, and it's an initiative or whatever it is, you're going to set it in motion with me, man. So I appreciate that, buddy, and I appreciate you being on a podcast tonight.
Well, I'm truly honored, Chris. Honored 2 things. Number one, to be a father, to be a good friend, and I'm very proud of you. And I thank you. I'm truly honored to be on your podcast.
I appreciate it, buddy. Well, dude, take care. Get some rest. Go fishing this weekend. And then for everybody else listening to the podcast, I just can't say it enough. But when you're going out there and enjoying that time in the water, just go ahead and always consider taking what you need and releasing the rest. So until next time, guys, join us right here in the Speckled Truth podcast. Tight lines. Hey, everyone. I just want to say thanks again for joining us here at the Speckled Truth podcast. Regardless of fishery and where you're joining us from, we really appreciate your followership and just tuning in tonight to listen to the stories that make their pursuit of trophy trout so special. And so, again, none of this happens without the support of our sponsors from MirrorLure, Texas Custom Lures, and the original Custom Corky. Without your support, none of this is possible. So thanks again to them. We hope to see you next time here at the Speckled Truth podcast. And we always want to leave you with this one tidbit. Always remember to take what you need and release the rest. God bless.